So now you understand the core concept of what the pen tool is. It allows you to plot these points, and it connects them with these particular paths. Now, until now, we've defined corner anchor points, which are connected by straight lines. Now let's talk about using the pen tool to create smooth anchor points and curved lines. So I'm going to use the same file. If you have the exercise files, it's called pen tool, and you'll find it in chapter 4. Once again, I'm going to switch to the pen tool that's right here. I'm also going to use the space bar to just simply move over here to the next part of this particular file. So this becomes a little bit more complex, but again, the concept here is understanding that we're plotting anchor points. We're not drawing the paths, and the paths will be drawn automatically by Illustrator. So let's see how this works. Now, I have basically the same number of anchor points that I would have in a rectangle. What I'm going to do now, though, is draw a circle, and let's see how that works. Now, before, we were just clicking and releasing the mouse, clicking, releasing the mouse, clicking, releasing the mouse. Those actions created straight lines, or just when you click and release with the mouse, with the pen tool, it creates a corner anchor point. But if you click and you drag with the pen tool, which is what I'm doing right now, you drag out these control handles from that anchor point. And then when I release the mouse, and then I click, that creates the curved path. And remember how we discussed before how the control handle helps define what that curve follows. So let's take a look. Let's delete that for now. And let's see how that works here with these simple instructions. And then we'll begin to see how this all kind of comes into play. And then we'll go through several examples so that we can build up some confidence with using the pen tool. I'm going to start off with step 1, where it says press here. I'm not going to let go of the mouse. I'm going to click, hold down the mouse button, drag in this direction. And I could use the shift key, by the way, as I do this, just to make sure that it's straight. And I'm going to release the mouse when I get to this point right here. So my control handle is basically going to come out to here. And now I'm going to release the mouse. So what I've done is I've defined an anchor point, but remember, this is not a corner anchor point. This is a smooth anchor point, which means that when I define now another anchor point, instead of a straight line, I'm going to get a curved line, and that curved line is defined by that particular control handle that I created. Don't worry about where it's going to go or so on and so forth. We're not up to a point now where we can anticipate that, but as you start to draw graphics, you'll begin to anticipate where the curves are going to go. So I'm now going to move my cursor down over here. Again, I have no mouse button down as I do this. I'm now going to hold down the mouse button now, click, and then drag, and I'm using the shift key down again to drag once again to this point right here. So now look what happened. By dragging out that control handle on either end over here, by the way, it's a symmetrical thing. When you draw out a control handle from an anchor point, by default, it's going to do that evenly on both sides of the anchor point. So what I now get is a curved line that connects these two anchor points. Let's go ahead and continue this. I'm going to go down over here, click, hold down the shift key, drag out here to this point. One more time, move my cursor up over here, click, drag, release. Start off at the beginning over here where I was. Notice now I get that little O. That means I'm about to close my path. Click, drag, release. So now what I've done is I've created the circle. If I move this over here, for example, to see what we're dealing with over here, remember how we drew that circle way back and we saw where the anchor points were and where the handles were? Well, now if I use my direct selection tool, my white arrow, and I click on just one of these points, I see exactly where those handles are. And by dragging out those handles, I can adjust how that particular path looks. Let's take a look at some other examples, and again, we'll get more familiar with what's happening here inside of Illustrator. So I'm going to go ahead and use the pen tool once again, and let's follow these directions. Click here, drag the mouse all the way down here, and then release the mouse once again. Come up over here. I'm just going to click once and then release the mouse. So you see how that created kind of like a little scallop that appears right over here? What I'm now going to do is click directly on that anchor point. By the way, see, when I move my cursor away, this is Illustrator letting me know that the pen tool with no other additional parts next to it is letting me know I'm currently in the middle of drawing right now a path. And remember, if I move kind of over here, it'll let me close the path. If I had the X, it means I'm drawing a new path. Well, right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my cursor right over that existing anchor point that I just created. You see that little inverted V that appears that's right there? That allows me to actually manually pull out a control handle from a particular shape. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to click and drag. I can hold the shift key down as I do this to drag out here. Now, I didn't do anything to the path. What I did was I manually pulled out a control handle. Now, remember before when I just clicked and dragged, the control handles appeared on both ends of the anchor point that I created? Well, now I only pulled out one control handle on one side of this. So this is what I call a combination point. Before we created anchor points, the corner anchor points that we created actually have just straight lines connecting them. There are no control handles. A smooth anchor point, basically, the path goes right through that anchor point, and the control handles are actually kind of a tangent to that particular path, and they're even on both sides. A combination point is kind of an anchor point that's half of a corner anchor point and half of a smooth anchor point. It does have a control handle, but only one of them, which means that the path actually changes directions as it goes through the point. Some people do call this a change direction point. What I'm going to do now is move my cursor over here and click once again. Notice how the path starts here, kind of goes through over here. If this were a smooth anchor point, the path would run right through the smooth anchor point up this way. But instead, the path changes direction and comes back down this way. And that happened because I pulled the control handle out of that point, only one of them in this particular direction. Let's do that again. I'm going to move my cursor over here. I see the inverted V. The inverted V is letting me know that I'm about to pull out a control handle. Click, drag downwards to here, and now release the mouse, move my cursor over to this part here, click once again. And now again, I've created that change direction point or that combination point. So now I'm able to do this. Now it's important to realize, by the way, remember as I said before, Illustrator will continue drawing paths until you decide otherwise. So if I click, let's say, somewhere else over here right now, it's going to continue drawing that path. If I don't want that to happen, what I'll do is I'll use the keyboard shortcut. The most common keyboard shortcut in Illustrator is going to be the Command key or the Control key, which takes me back to the last used selection tool. Now if I press the Command key and I just click on any blank area on my screen, I've now deselected that shape. So now when I go back to the pen tool, I get the little X, which means I'm now ready to draw a new path, and now I can start drawing a new path that way as well. So let's move on to some of the other shapes that I have here in this particular example. Again, the more that you start to use the pen tool, the more that you begin to learn what it does. So I'm going to start over here. Take my pen tool right here. I'm going to click once right over here, drag to here, click once over here, drag to here. What I end up getting right now is a curved path like this. And this is a really great example to see exactly. I'm going to go ahead and go to my layers panel here. Let's hide the instructions for a second here. Let's understand what is happening here when I create these paths. When I clicked and dragged, remember, I dragged out this particular control handle to right here. And then when I created this anchor point and I clicked and dragged, it also created a control handle out to here. And notice how the path that's over here is kind of drawn upwards because the control handle's here, but this part of the path is drawn downwards because this control handle's here as well. Again, think of the control handles as like a magnet, and as I move the control handle, the path is drawn to wherever that magnet goes. Let's turn this instructions layer back on again. Let's focus on this particular part here of this artwork. I'm going to again use the pen tool. Let's start off over here. Click over here. I'm holding down the mouse button, I'm dragging all the way till here, and then I release. That's step 2. Now let's go to step 3 over here. Click, drag all the way down here, release, position over here, click, drag upwards over here, release the mouse, move my cursor here to the final point, click, drag, and then release. And now I've created this shape that's right over here. Now again, it's important as you start to work with Illustrator's pen tool to start to anticipate, hey, where is the next anchor point going to go? I mean, here it's a little bit easy because you have this template in the background which is telling you where to click. However, when you start creating freeform paths on your own, the more experience you get the pen tool, like for example, a friend of mine, Bert Monroy, fantastic Illustrator user, great Photoshop user, and what he does inside of Photoshop is just unreal. He creates these wonderful shapes and he just basically picks up the pen tool and starts drawing with it. I'm not even on that level. He understands where the anchor points need to go to make the paths go there. It's reverse psychology. Don't think about the paths, think about where the anchor points need to go, and Illustrator goes ahead and does that. Let's do one final example here. Again, I'm going to hold down the Command key, and I'm simply going to click, so now the other path is deselected. Now the pen tool has a little X next to it, meaning I'm ready to start with a new path. I'm going to click here, drag down here, release. Click here, drag down here, release. Click here, drag down here, release. Click here, drag down here, and release, and I get a lovely wave pattern, which is great because the whole theme of our title throughout today is Groundswell, which is a surfing company, so great to have some waves in here. But again, the more that you start working with Illustrator, this is actually some really good exercises. I would suggest that maybe you take this file and try to anticipate and maybe try to create that exact same wave without using the template in a new file. See if you can now anticipate where those anchor points are. Again, the more and more that you start using the pen tool, the more that you get used to it, the more easily you start creating shapes inside of Illustrator. However, I will emphasize one thing before we kind of walk away from the pen tool here. There are plenty of other drawing tools inside of Illustrator, and if you don't get the pen tool right away, that's perfectly fine. You don't need to use the pen tool. In fact, there are many other features inside of Illustrator besides the primitive drawing tools that we've already defined. We'll talk about a paintbrush tool and a pencil tool, and there's even some features called Live Paint in Illustrator that really make it easy for you to get started with drawing graphics. The pen tool, though, at the very, very core, is probably the tool that allows you to just go crazy and have the most control over the vectors, because remember, the pen tool is that quintessential tool. It allows you to edit and work with anchor points, which is the base of all vector graphics. Speaking of other tools, such as the pen tool, in the next movie we'll take a look at how you can use the pen tool to create graphics as well, which is somewhat more intuitive, but you lose the control that you have with the pen tool.